So to start off, hi, I'm Sean. Really nice to meet you both. I wish we could meet in person and have this conversation, but alas, Zoom will have to do. Uh, so I kind of just wanted to start really at your birth or early childhood, uh, Lucretia, and if you could just sort of talk me through, your early years and how you related to Quakerism when you were born and in your early, teens.
Okay. I was born in 1920, December the 4th. So my 100th birthday is coming up. And it's awesome, but it seems very natural too. And I feel as though I've lived the years fully and enjoyed them. I was born in Upper New Jersey. My family moved sort of down with the making of the railroad in those early days from northern Jersey right down to Haddonfield. We had houses we rented in different places, I guess, for while the tracks being built. My father was into that business right after college. My parents were both Quakers from birth, and my mother came from, well, I guess they both came from State College. When it was time for them to be married, or when Dad asked Mother to marry, they transferred their membership to Lancaster County. They were both, father was Lancaster County, and my mother was Center County up in State College, out of State College. So we kids, from the time we were born, were members, birthright members of the meeting in Lancaster County. So then came the Depression, 1929. And my father's boss, a Quaker at different places in New Jersey, building that track, decided it was the best for him to retire. So he did, and that left my father without a job. And those years then were difficult. Things looked better, and we moved over to Pennsylvania to outside of Media and built a bungalow there. And when things were still more or less okay, and then we still kept the house. We always did that, but we kids were farmed out to relatives during the summers to work and to have room and board. I went to Lancaster County a lot of those summers and worked with in 3 different relatives' homes. But I enjoyed those summers. They were worthwhile and they were interesting. Well, then as I got into teenage and 20s, I went to University of Pennsylvania with a scholarship and graduated in 1942. Well, during vacations from school and college and so forth, we young friends looked into the nature of Quakerism in Philadelphia, and there were a bad division in 1827. And that's when the Orthodox formed in the Hicksite. And it tended to be that the country folks were Hicksite and the city folks were Orthodox. My husband, Bill, always said that while he was born into a city meeting, Orthodox meeting, he was more closer to the Hicksite in their theology, and their theology was such that it meant that they weren't as biblically connected. I mean, they were, but it wasn't the same emphasis. It was more a faith of activity and work in this world and helping, with others. But finally, in the 1950s, they began to come together again, and everything was much better from then on. But during those years in Philadelphia, we visited the different meetings, 15th and Cherry Street. That's when they were still separated. The one meeting was there, and the other one was at 4th and Arch. So we were hoping that things would get together again, and meetings would get together. And so we had attended the activities at 4th and Arch. When I was at Penn, we young friends were more active, very active, in helping to support the coming together of the two meetings. There was a Christian association, and we had a Quaker group there with a person who happened to be head of the whole Christian association, but he was a Quaker. I never ran into him in later life, but we had an active program, and I enjoyed that. And then for a while, before it was totally merged, we were very much leaders in the period when there was a so-called general meeting with a lecture and everybody coming together. And sometimes the sessions were in 15th and Cherry Meeting House, and sometimes they're in 4th and Arch. It was a good time. We were really at a time when it was coming together again.
Do you think it's just the time period of the mid to late 40s that that was kind of energizing young friends to reintegrate?
It began before that. When I was in kindergarten, we lived in Haddonfield. We'd come down from the north down to southern Central Africa, New Jersey, and I think I'm right that at that time that there was a split of 1827, and the Hicksite and the Orthodox meeting houses were on the same property, but they were sort of separate. It was really weird. That was not Haddonfield. I think that was Morristown, New Jersey. But anyhow, we kids were aware of the two businesses, two meetings and all. And when we moved from Haddonfield, New Jersey to outside of Media, Pennsylvania, and I lived there for 14 years. I entered second grade when we moved. My sister was younger, and she was in kindergarten at Gailey Street Terrace. So I went to school at 3rd Street meeting, Orthodox, and she went to the Hicksite meeting near Route Baltimore Pike, but they were all under one operation. They were different locations because of the space involvement, so forth. So,
do you want to talk a little bit about meeting your husband?
Yeah,
I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
After college at Penn, I'll never forget. I've got to say this. I'll never forget eating lunch in the cafe, and the music was on the radio, and all of a sudden it was interrupted, and it said that the Japanese have just hit Pearl Harbor. That was terrible news, terrible news. And so I got more and more interested in doing something, if I could myself, for peace. So after 4 years in St. Louis, 42 to 46, I came back to Philadelphia and to a job with the Friends Service Committee. And I was there and lived in near the campus of Penn in a co-op house, a group of young people that were Friendship Co-op House, and commuted down to Penn, to the service committee. And I was there for 3 years, I think that's right, 42, 46, 48. Yeah, I was there for 48, maybe 2 years. And I applied to work abroad because a lot of people after the war, even before the war was over, a lot of people worked in the ambulance unit and so forth in Europe. And I got my nerve up to serve abroad in 46 and didn't want to go for the usual year and a half to 2 year appointment, and I thought that might be a little much. So I signed up to go to Finland, which was to be for 6 months. The Finns had suffered terribly in World War II. The Germans, and the Germans were really not fighting the Finns, but they were in eastern Finland fighting the Russians. And when things got worse and the Russians were coming against the Germans and driving them away from Russia, the Germans fled all the way up through the country and out into the Arctic area to get away. They couldn't go down right into the continent of Europe, Denmark or Germany or anything, because there's no way with the fighting going on there that they could get through there. So they went out through northern Finland, Lapland, and that had where are we now? That was started by a group of older young people who were willing to go over and help us get some work camps going. And they did. And Douglas Steer from Haverford College was there also helping out. He was at Haverford, as I said, faculty, but every 2 years he arranged with Haverford to go with his wife on a year sabbatical, in which time he was interested in serving in different countries and helping to talk about Quakerism and peace and so forth, all parts of the world. So somehow he got involved with it in Finland before I got over there, and we started. I guess he knew about Pendle Hill here. You know about Pendle Hill, Wallingford. So he got equivalent started, or something like the same thing, started in Finland, and it was called Vitakivi. So I went over to join that work camp group, and of course we sailed over on a Swedish ship called the Stockholm, and so I got to Finland, and I was to work in the main office when the New England couple were due to come. The people who had been there before me, one lady, it was time for her to go after 2 years, but she wasn't being replaced until the fall. So I helped to tide over in the executive work until the other came. The most exciting thing I did in Finland, interesting thing, was to escort around the country a fundraiser for the service committee named Lita Cromwell. And she was a character. She was a lady, no Quaker connection, but she was from New York, and she had a self-made job of talking to women's clubs in New York and telling them about her trips abroad. I never heard about any other trips she made, but apparently she did every couple of years. So it happened to be the one that I was at the time when I was in Finland for 6 months. So we got on the train and we went up through Sweden to where the Rovaniemi, and every house along the way, and when we got to the city of Rovaniemi in Lapland, every house was burned. All that was left were the chimneys. It couldn't be wood, of course. So we got to Rovaniemi and were welcomed by the team working there. And they had things pretty well under control with clothing distributions and food and so forth to help the people. And it was still pretty bad destruction of the buildings. And we went across a makeshift bridge on some river that comes down out of the left arm of Finland, and went to a work camp, visited a work camp in Lapland. And so we slept in a great big tent. And all night long, we could hear, if we were awake, we could hear people pounding, rebuilding their houses. And this was 48, and the war was over in 45. So it was pretty bad. And we helped in one house to dig a foundation for a cook stove, which was also a stove to heat the place. And we dug down to 39 inches, a little bit over a yard. And just one other point about the Russians when they invaded Finland, and Finland's been beaten up by other countries for generations, years and years. But the Finns did in World War II take another chunk off of the eastern little strip of peace, my side, your side, east, and on up in the central. So it was sad for the Finns to lose more property, and the people had to, I guess, make the decision whether they'd stay in what were their homes and now Russia belonged to Russia or not. Well, I decided I went for 6 months because I wasn't sure I wanted to stay any longer. That was the assignment I had, but it was very interesting. And then I was deciding what to do next. And they offered me a job of working in London with the joint program of the American Friends Service Committee and the British Friends Service Council. And so I took the train from down through Sweden, across the body of water, where there were still mines, but I don't think it was very dangerous. We probably wouldn't have been there, over to near Warsaw, Danzig. I was a little apprehensive the whole time, but I went to Warsaw, and I actually got to go out to the country outside of Warsaw to see a project where young people were transporting by old ex-army trucks building materials for people who had lost their homes. And that was interesting. And then we met in a little shelter made in the basement of a bombed out building, talked with young college kids and told them, what it was like then for them. We also went to see the what do you call it? The ghetto, just obliterated. All the apartments, brick buildings, and all those busted up, ruined. Thousands of people, I guess, died. After that, I decided I didn't really want to work in London with the program in Poland. So I told them that, and lo and behold, they decided not to have that program anyhow. And so it was just canceled. And I then had an opportunity to go to Germany, and that suited me fine. And I was in, well, at that time, Germany was divided into 4 sections. Russian section, we didn't get to see much. English section, we'll have to look around the other way around. English section for you, and American section down here, over here, and down here the French. So that it was a good arrangement, except that the Russian one was, Russia was still so separate from the West that you couldn't go in at all. You just were not allowed to. I was in Germany for nearly 2 years. Well, no, yes, that's right. But in between Finland and Germany, I decided to go to Woodbrook. Have you heard of Pendle Hill?
Yeah.
Outside of Philadelphia? Well, Woodbrook is really a predecessor of Pendle Hill, and it's out of Birmingham. And so I went to that as a student, and we had a German, veteran, not a veteran, but a German Jewish person who was in charge of the international relations. We had quite a few students who had suffered in the war. We had a German woman, and her husband and she had been confined to a basement apartment, and it was too damp, and he didn't survive. And when they were still, when they were imprisoned in France, and so it was an unhappy time for her. But it was interesting to be in Woodbrook. It was something like Pendle Hill. Okay, so then after Finland, I decided I really wasn't ready to come back to the States. So I got another assignment with the Friends Service Committee, and that was working in Germany. And at first, when I went to Germany, we were in the town Freiburg in South Germany, and that was then in the French zone. It was pretty badly destroyed, including a lovely old church. Anyhow, one of the striking things there was Albert Schweitzer, who had served with his wife in Africa so many years and even had a piano down there. He periodically came to visit with his wife, came to Freiburg to visit her family. And so they helped somehow. I guess they were asked, the friends, if they could be of help by taking them from the train station to the relative's house. And that's what happened. And then they invited us to hear a concert that he played in a little church. It was so cold in a little church, I don't know how he made his fingers move, but we all were bundled up, and he did beautifully. And then we invited them, for giving us a concert, to come to our barracks. We had, service committee had bought a Swedish-made barracks for their office in southern Germany. And I was just there 3 weeks, and I moved north. Well, the whole group moved north. But anyhow, Albert Schweitzer and his wife came for a tea party, and we shook hands with him and his wife. His wife spoke some English, but he didn't speak any English. So it was interesting. Then when we moved from there up to Darmstadt, we stayed in a castle, Schloss Kranichstein. Kranichstein was the name of the suburb of Darmstadt. And that we got through the current Princess of Hesse. In 1927, this princess and her English husband, I think that's right, were married, and her husband was part of. Was in the royal family of Hesse, and they had a little garden, Prince Emil's garden in Darmstadt, where we were able to have a program a multi-purpose program to have make a shoemaker for making shoes or soles for people, and a kindergarten program and a young people's program, something. And years later, when I went back with my husband, we visited that little center, and it was still going. So I was there for almost 2 years, and then came back to Philadelphia and continued to work at the service committee. But very soon, then I had an apartment in Aubrey, Aubrey in Germantown. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I went to a meeting there, and that first Sunday I saw Bill's family there, and Arthur, his brother Arthur, had been a student at Woodbrook in England when I was there. There were 4 Americans of us. One boy I never saw since, but he came from New Jersey, and the other one was a Mennonite from somewhere in this country. she'd been working with the Mennonite Central Committee in Europe. But so we met, and then Bill was going to Tennessee. So we courted for 3 years, but I guess it was before he left. I think that's right. And he took off for Tennessee. And then, so I got a little secondhand MG and went back and forth, and we saw, and he came up and finally asked me to marry him. And that's that. And that worked out beautifully.
Wow. I mean, quite a time. All over the place. Well, my last question is really just about reflecting on really the 60s, the 1960s through the present, and where you've seen the meeting and Quakerism sort of go. Do you have anything that you want to say about that, or?
Oh,
It's an open-ended question, I know.
I'm trying to think. I came back from Europe. I went over to Europe in 48, came back in 50, and returned my job in Philadelphia, a job, a different one. When I had been there the first time after I moved during the war from St. Louis to Philadelphia, I was in the finance office. But when I went to Finland, after I came back from Finland, I worked in the International Centers Desk for 3 years, during which time it was sort of shut down because there wasn't as much emphasis on maintaining centers in Berlin or there was other focus at Berlin and Tokyo and New Delhi, India, and so forth. So they changed. That's another story. I don't know too much about it because it got changed. But I worked 3 more years, and then Bill asked me to marry him, and we lived in Tennessee, had our 4 children.
And then when did you come back to Philadelphia?
Good question. Oh, yeah. We lived in Tennessee over 50 years. Bill was a doctor in a medical group that was established called the Cumberland Clinic we're in Cumberland County. And it was to serve all people, of any age or any ability, different abilities to pay and so forth. But it got more difficult because there was practically no competition when they started. There was one other local person who was a doctor, and he was a good neighbor and friend and fine. But there was also another doctor on the hospital staff that was did illegitimate things. He wouldn't take out appendix, but he took them out, but he took them out and shouldn't have, that sort of thing. So I worked a lot, besides having the 4 children. When they were off to school and whatnot, I worked in the hospital as a pink lady. It's just a volunteer that works with young people, teenage kids that want to serve in the hospital. So I was a sort of supervisor of just a volunteer job. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah. No, that's excellent. Yeah.
Well, then it wasn't after we moved to Tennessee when we were married in 53, the fall of 53, we started going down to West Knoxville to a friends meeting that was being held in somebody's home, the west side of the town. And sometimes we went to a friend's church thinking we maybe could have a connection with that and do both. But they were more interested in being their own church, and so we started the West Knoxville Friends meeting, had a little house, meeting house built, and as far as I know, it's thriving, has been thriving. And as far as I know, it still is. I should inquire some, but of course, all the people that we knew are gone, except me. No, I don't know about that for sure. I don't think there are any of them left. None that I keep in touch with, anyhow. Mm-hmm. And but when we first started, we both started at a friends meeting in our home, and a 5-minute walk away in the home of Bill's identical twin. He had an identical twin, and his wife, and they were married long before we were, and they had 6 children. Is that right? Oh, Beck's gone. 6 children. And we're all in touch with each other. So it's a big family.
There seem to be Evanses everywhere.
Yeah. And I was active as active as I could be with 4 children. And Bill was less active because he was often on call on the Sundays and so forth. But we helped start the Southern Appalachian Association of Friends, SAF, SAAF. And that was we were married in the fall of 1953. That was pretty soon after we were married. I don't remember right now the exact time. But next we in 1970, well, from then till 1970, we met in the, we had yearly sessions, yearly meeting sessions in somewhere in different places in Crosslands, our town. And it grew and became very active. And through all these years we've been away, we have not maintained any contact, and sometimes we hear about it, but not very. We never knew very much. But some people thought, expressed their feeling that we should become a yearly meeting, an official yearly meeting, and not just an association. SAAF was the Southern Appalachian Association of Friends, but it should be a yearly meeting. So since we couldn't quite decide what to do about that, some thought we should have it, and some thought we shouldn't. For temporarily, we decided to make it Southern Appalachian Yearly Meeting and Association. Instead of SAF, it was SAMA. And as far as I know, it's still SAMA, and it's still very similar to what it was, but it is Yearly Meeting and Association, and never became just a yearly meeting. The name is so nice, SAMA. Mm-hmm. Has kept it that way, I think. Sometime out of curiosity, I should just find out what it's like now.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot.
We have. I want to thank you for sharing everything. I might follow up with some written questions that I need clarification on, but I'm gonna I'll definitely type some of this stuff up, and thank you very much for sharing. I really appreciate it.